Hello and welcome to Runkle of the Bailey. My name is Ian Runkle. I'm a Canadian criminal defense and firearms lawyer. Today I want to talk about some information that was shared by the Canadian Sporting Arms and Ammunition Association. And this is getting a lot of commentary. It's getting a lot of people asking me questions. So I wanted to sort of clarify what the law is and offer a little bit of further commentary. But first I'll read the tweet. It notes, "Restricted firearms buyers beware. Starting yesterday, March 10th, firearm retailers have been receiving this notice in the email for approved transfer requests, but it is not on the document printed for customers. Approvals no longer serve as temporary registration certificates." And the notice that they provide is, effective immediately, transfer notification's purpose is to take possession of a newly acquired firearm and no longer serves as a temporary registration certificate. And then it's repeated in French. The CSAAA continues on to say, "Businesses receive no notification or bulletin from the CFO on this change. Customers will have to wait to receive their final registration certificates to take their new restricted firearm to the range." So that's got a lot of people sort of wondering what's going on and so forth. I want to take us to the criminal code just so I can talk about what the law says and how Parliament designed the criminal code in this respect. So let's first jump, and this is just an example section because there's lots of different subsections about being in possession of a firearm illegally. Now, the language that's used here is repeated several times. So this is an example section, but it's one that is mirrored in other provisions. So unauthorized possession of a firearm. Subject to subsection 4, every person commits an offense who possesses a prohibited firearm, restricted firearm, or a non-restricted firearm without being the holder of A, a license under which the person may possess it, and B, in the case of a prohibited or restricted firearm, a registration certificate for it. So what I'm going to kind of draw your attention to, and I covered this a little bit in a previous case, but we see here they talk about anyone who possesses these things without being the holder of a license. Now, when we see two words used for a vaguely similar concept in close proximity like this, statutory interpretation says that these are meant to be different things, that these are meant to have a different interpretation. And so possession is a well-known concept in especially the criminal law, because there's all sorts of criminal laws about things you're not allowed to be in possession of. That's not to say it's a simple concept. Lots of cases are fought over whether or not something counts as possession. But the concept is not sort of new. It's not unknown. What possession is one of those things you've got to learn as a lawyer, and it gets fought about, but it's not sort of it's not novel. Holder means something different. And holder in the sense of being the holder of a license or similar thing, generally means that you've got one issued to you, whether or not it's in your physical possession. So even if it might not actually be in your wallet at any particular moment, you're still the holder of a license so long as one has been issued. Now, this is in keeping with some very public promises that were made. It was stated that you will not go to jail for forgetting your wallet. And the language here is intended to reflect that. The language here is to say it's not a criminal offense to have forgotten your wallet at home, even if you've got these firearms. You're taking your restricted firearm to the range, you've forgotten your wallet. This doesn't make it a crime, like a criminal offense. Now, you might be saying, well, what do they do if they find you without your license? Because surely, there's some sort of consequence for that. And they did, in fact, write something in contemplation of the circumstance where you don't have your paperwork with you. And that is this provision. Seizure on failure to produce authorization. So despite section 117.02, which you're not going to have to worry about for right now, a peace officer who finds a person in possession of a prohibited firearm, restricted firearm, or a non-restricted firearm who fails on demand to produce for inspection by the peace officer an authorization or a license under which the person may lawfully possess the firearm, and, in the case of a prohibited firearm or a restricted firearm, a registration certificate for it. B is pretty much the same thing, but applies to prohibited weapons and ammunition, as well as restricted weapons. And then it says, may seize the firearm, prohibited weapon, restricted weapon, etc., unless its possession by the person in the circumstances in which it is found is authorized by any provision of this part, or the person is under the direct and immediate supervision of another person who may lawfully possess it. And there's provisions for if you show up within 14 days after they've seized it and provide them with the documentation, then the thing shall, without delay, be returned to that person. And if you don't do that within 14 days, they can go to a judge and ask the judge to have that forfeited to the government. But you'll have an opportunity, if they apply for that, to explain that, you know, how you're lawfully entitled to possess it. So that's kind of what's envisioned here, is that if you didn't have your license and the police officer can't determine that you do actually have a license, because there's this bit here about unless its possession by the person in the circumstances is authorized by any provision of this part. So if they can determine that you do have a license and registration certificate and all of that stuff that have been issued to you, whether or not they're on your person, they're not supposed to seize. So this is basically, if you can't prove the gun is, you know, lawfully registered to you, etc., they can seize it until you, you know, show up with the proof. That's kind of how this is contemplated to work, is this scenario where forgetting your license doesn't result in you getting criminal charges. It just results in you getting this seizure provision. So not having your registration certificate on you, so long as one has been issued to you, shouldn't result in criminal charges, even if you're doing something like taking it to the range. If we go back to the section 91 here, the unauthorized possession, you'll note that you have to be the holder of a registration certificate. If the transfer notice is good enough for you to take that firearm home, it's just as good to take it to the range, because you are the holder of a registration certificate. That transfer notice indicates that a registration certificate has been created for you. It might not yet be a paper copy of it. It might be a digital document at this stage, but you are now the registered owner of this firearm once that transfer notification has been completed. Now, there is a further wrinkle here. Actually, a couple of further wrinkles that I want to go over. The first one is Section 58 Sub 1 of the Firearms Act. So 58 Sub 1, conditions. A chief firearms officer who issues a license, an authorization to carry, or an authorization to transport may attach any reasonable condition to it that the chief firearms officer considers desirable in the particular circumstances and in the interests of the safety of the holder or any other person. So there's a lot to go through here. I'm going to talk about Section 58 in another video because I have some issues with it that are too much for me to go over in this video. But what they'll sometimes do, and in some provinces this is the practice, is they'll attach a condition to everybody's license. Now, certain conditions have to be attached to everybody's license by statute, and that's fine. But sometimes the chief firearms officer will go a step further and attach a further condition to everybody's license just because they decided to. And that's a bit of a problem. But in some provinces, one of the conditions they'll add is that you must be in possession of your registration certificates. If that is the case, then you're not able to do anything with that transfer notice because it's not the registration certificate itself. So it's really important whenever you're contemplating doing anything with a firearm, especially restricted or prohibited firearms, that you check any conditions that you may have on your license. You should know this. Don't just look at the license when you get it. Check the condition sheet as well, and make sure you know it inside and out as to what it tells you you can and cannot do. The other thing is that police officers sometimes don't know the criminal code. I have seen situations where people have been charged for unauthorized possession of a firearm, notwithstanding the fact that the officer checked and determined that the individual was the holder of a license, simply because that license couldn't be produced. So there is legal risk in terms of not having a registration certificate. It's also really unclear as to why this change is being made, why they've decided that the transfer notice isn't a temporary registration certificate. So that's Something I guess we'll see. I'm wondering if this means that they're planning on, on charging people, planning on going after people who might take their guns to the range right after getting them. That's just sort of what we're going to be left wondering here at this stage is why did they do this? What's going on? Because the CFO doesn't do a whole lot by accident. The CFOs meet, they talk about sort of strategies, they talk about plans, and I'm really kind of curious as to what's going on behind the scenes, sort of under the hood here. Anyway, thank you for watching. Please like this video. Please share it with your friends. Subscribe to see more content. This is going to be an interesting thing just to see what happens. But as noted, the law here is supposed to not require you to actually carry the registration certificate, but it is a very good idea to do so anyway. Anyway, I also want to thank my Patreon supporters. There's a link to the Patreon below if you want to become one of them. At the $50 level, Sir Daniel Wicks of Alberta, Jason Elliott, D. Mo, Canada's National Firearms Association, North Central Process Service, Kyle Martin, and Jean-Guy Toussaint. At the $20 level, Dale Nesbitt, Cameron Johnson, and Andrew Elsich. And at the $30 level, Sights and Arms Limited. I also want to thank all of you at the $10 level who will be in the crawl immediately following. Thank you for watching, and I hope this has armed you with knowledge.